Hey, part two of May 25th walk around of Old Growth Orchard and Nursery, Zumeta. And this is a hugel bed that my wife actually helped build with an excavator on her first time running it. And great facility for it. A mix of garlic that we're going to let go perennial, fennel for pollinators and culinary use, a native Northwest crab apple, which is grafted to I believe this one was a heritage apple. It looks like we're getting some bud swell on it. Yeah, Roxbury russet, which if I remember correctly is one of the oldest apples endemic to the U.S. Another of it's either its parent or its daughter is on another crab apple across the pond. Ash means kernel. Can't remember which one's the older and which one is the seedling. This is a red currant, really hummingbird habitat benefiter. The nasturtiums there, a mock orange, which has beautiful fragrance. Here's a red alder for nitrogen fixation and shade, but I'll be largely cutting it back. That's chop and drop for mulch and nitrogen infusions, because when you cut back the vegetation of a plant, the proportional amount of roots die back, and that will help feed the soil and create cavities of decomposing really nutrient-rich organic matter for microbes to decompose and then feed plants. Another Craig's Crimson Cherry, a sweet cherry. So red strawberry guava. There's a gooseberry and thimbleberry down past next to those kayaks. We've got a gooseberry here. The citrus did not enjoy 6 feet of snow and 24 degrees, so they decided to turn into compost. I planted some raspberries behind them, but I think there might be not great on your end. Apologies. I've got a hat and sunglasses on. This is a wetland. It's becoming a wetland area, and I have some further wetland habitat improvements to make. And I hope to really connect this habitat with the pond and the surrounding area to be a really biodiverse sponge, and that will help hydrate everything downhill. So we got native rose, Seneca rose, vine maple, planted on my mom's birthday, which was she was my inspiration to get into gardening. She taught me how to garden. She encouraged me to start a quote business when I was 11, really as a way to have me busy and outside, and doing landscaping for a neighbor who just happened to be babysitting my little brother. There's another of those crab apples grafted to I believe that is a sweet, which apple was that? You know, when you plant close to 1,000 trees, you start to forget Liberty. It's harder to remember every individual tree, but it's all the more reason to do more visits and to observe daily. Looks like that graft is taking. I should have, in hindsight, cut this graft to only 2 buds to reduce the stress on the plant and the wind. I really pretty sure I knew better when I did that, and but long days, I'm pretty sure it was 39 degrees and raining, and I was tired. Here's some irises. We have 4 different types of iris planted around the pond. Normally, if I remember right, they would have bloomed by now. There's another vine maple. We have kind of an arch of, or a ring of vine maples around the pond. I think they have some of the prettiest foliage of anything you can grow in this part of the world, which is Northwest California. About 15 miles from Oregon border and 5 to 7 miles from the Pacific Ocean. There's an Oregon ash, but these deciduous hardwood native trees are wet feet tolerant and will eventually create seasonal shade to shade the pond during the hot time of year. There is Ashman's kernel back there. That apple, I believe it was a favorite of Thomas Jefferson. That or is the previous one I talked about. Big leaf maple, another of my favorite trees. They can support twice their own biomass in other plants just on their above ground, like on their trunks and branches. They store huge amounts of moss, and that stores water from our rainy season, which is when they are dormant, and that moss will then feed them. It grows when they get bigger, but that moss will then both feed and water them because it's a nitrogen fixator and nutrient accumulator, and all the little insects and microbes that live in it also contribute nutrients. And so basically the tree has a place to root right out from its trunk. This is another Oregon ash. The tree baseball bats are made out of. That's being hit by the by the ash borer, and has been over harvested historically. So it's good wetland native plant. See, this is a sugar maple. Why not? And yeah, we planted 5 of those, partially for fall color, and if we get some sap running, and we can make syrup out of it. This is another potential syrup tree, the linden, but its biggest benefit is honey production, and it's an extremely good pollinator plant. In addition to having delicious leaves, but I have a linden planted in where there's a line of sight to another linden throughout the food forest. So down below, there's a linden at the bottom of the hill there, which I don't think I'll walk through this time, but there's about 50 trees down the slope below the fence. A similar mix to what you see here and what I've walked through before. And at the bottom, there's a linden, and then there's a linden on the far side of the hill. There's a linden behind me that we'll walk past. And so yeah, there's a linden where a bee could see another linden at any point in the food forest. And so that will basically create these traffic patterns where they will, by chance, disperse pollen, as well as make stops at the plums and pears and whatnot to help pollinate. Gonna point downhill away from the sun right now. It's been a tough spot to get things established. I've been trying to get elderberries in, but it's a hard place to water, so I might need to lean into hardier plants, or in some cases just focus where plants do want to grow. So we have I think this is a scrub oak volunteer. There's a elderberry behind there, which do not believe made it, but there's a raspberry I planted. This big leaf maple did not make it through its first year. year over year, there's about an 80% success rate overall. It varies from as little as 25%. This is another Oregon ash, but which have all survived. But they varied from 25% for mulberries and up to, I'd say we're over 90% for cherries. So at year 2, we had about 65% of the trees that I planted surviving. Trees and shrubs, I should say. And that was out of 600, and I planted another 300 or so this year. And then there was another couple hundred seedlings of native trees as well as apples that I planted that I did not count most of them because I didn't get watered. Those numbers of the trees that got watered. I'm looking at a dead chestnut there for no reason. Love these little wildflowers coming up this time of year. This is a honey locust. I used a similar strategy with the honey locust to the linden for pollinators. Pollinization. It's one of the little seedling apples amidst a bunch of manzanita. I forked the hillside, basically the entire food forest, about a month ago, and spread wildflower seeds and cover crops that are good for erosion control and minimize fire risk. That is a apple coming up. It looks like to me, or is that a root sucker from a cherry? I spread apple mash here, and I think I'm just seeing the cotyledons of a few of those, but that looks more like a cherry to me, and I thought that cherry had died. Well, if you know better, feel free to post your insight on that. I also spread peas in the early spring as soon as I could, but it's later than I would have liked because it had to be after snow melted in late March. I spread peas around each of these cages for nitrogen fixation and soil building, as well as potentially a snack while I'm working. But I don't think they're going to do very well this year. It's just doesn't seem like a good year for peas. Last year was great, and kind of coincidentally, beans were not very successful for me, whereas the opposite the previous year. Oh, no, that is a peach that I'd planted from a seed. The previous tree that I was wondering what it was. Yeah, I should have labeled those better. Those are seedlings I just put in the nursery bed. I was diverted from the compost. There's a pear. Pretty sure this is one of the Perry pears. Yeah. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. Teelersburn. Thanks to my friend Terry Alloway for the cutting. I've got to watch my steps so I don't crush wildflowers here. It's cherry and then pear behind there. I think pears have been second to cherries in their survival rate. Probably in the mid to high 80s. Overall, I have it written down somewhere and could just subtract what I've noticed has died since the spring, or since the fall really, but didn't come out in the spring. But yeah, there's about close to 30 cherries, about 20 pears, about 20 plums. Plums actually did quite poorly among the stone fruit. About 25 apples, 15 mulberries, a bunch of young hazelnuts, but only maybe 10 have survived, the older ones. And let's see. Then of the chestnuts, there were about 25. Almost all the butternuts survived. So probably about 20 out of the 24 of those. And right in front of me is one of the surviving white mulberries, which I was surprised didn't do very well. Until I read more about how they really need to get established with enough water. And that's the one that's really my limiting factor here, along with soil. But the weather is great, and you can build soil. It's the lowest on the chain of permanence, or scale of permanence. So I figured a beautiful location with really ideal weather and a very affordable land and abundant water for California would be a good place to try to prove some of the soil building techniques that I've been working on a smaller scale. This property's 25 acres. I've only really planted out about 3 of those. 3 to 4, depending on how you, but I mean, in some ways you could measure it as a fraction because, well, do you count the space in between these trees at this point, or do you count just the footprint of the trees and what I actually dug up, which would be a fraction of an acre? Because when I planted, I partially due to the scale and difficulty of this ground, which is very rocky clay, and the number of trees I had to plant, but also in the theory that plants are cooperating as much as they are competing. I did much more like soil surgery than butchery, and really tried to carve. I made sure every root had its was able to extend fully, but carved out trenches for them in between native plants with minimal disturbance to the soil, and then spread compost, relatively small amounts, but primarily for inoculation, and compost teas and extracts as well. And really, my intuition to go for seedling and standard rootstocks has borne out, as those have done a lot better. But on the other hand, I believe the difficulty of the soil might, in the long run, have some benefits in the reduction of vigor that creates a lot of work in places in valley bottom soils that are more abundant in nutrients, and it'll have a bit more control of nitrogen and other nutrients as growth regulators. But of course, I wouldn't mind having a little bit of glacial till silt or river silt to work with right now and again. So I have about 8 yards of compost left to spread, and tomorrow, or on Sunday, we are going to be making what could amount to about 400 gallons of biochar, or what could be inoculated with compost to become biochar. That will get mixed in with that bulk compost to be spread, as well as garden soil. Still have some experimenting on how to use it at scale. So far, it's just been about 3 to 5% of my Johnson Sioux compost. So these rings where there's a dead tree or no tree at all, it's generally where there are apple mash spread. And so of those several hundred seedlings, there's a good chance one will survive, and with minimal help, and be either at the very least good rootstock, and at best possible breeding potential if it produces good fruit. So we're getting up into the oak, more nut production and tap-rooted trees. So this is a bur oak, Ashworth bur oak, which produces the largest acorns, and they're actually edible raw, like a chestnut or other raw edible nut. There's a black locust, hazelnut, tiny little hazelnut. I believe that is one of my empty cages. I gotta get replanted. Oh, sorry about that. I'm blocking. Well, I'm at a spot. Oh, actually, here's another Ashworth bur oak coming out. Those seem to, even if they lose their leaves in September, apparently from dehydration, they have come back for me. So we have some chestnuts here. This is the chestnut set area, which I planted to try to catch cross breezes, kind of in an L shape, to increase pollination, which is as they're wind pollinated. These are trees that got planted in about a month ago. This stretch do not believe any of the preceding planting survived. But that was partially because, well, almost entirely because of the fact they didn't get watered in time as I was cycling through watering these uphill areas that I have to use a tank on my truck for. They were looking good in August, and then by mid-September I was running behind, and they had all died. But this one actually survived from last year. About a dozen of them survived from last year, and I planted out another couple dozen. I think it was 35 this spring. There are 7 different varieties, which Koche Magule, I'm probably mispronouncing that, Yazawa, or Tanzawa, not Yazawa, the Salta, Marron de Val de Souza. They have some fun names. There's kind of a interlocking arch here, and there will eventually be only one tree per 12 feet, and then, or actually that's about where they're at now. I planted them before on even denser spacing to make sure that at least one would survive per 12 feet, and then eventually one per 25 feet, and then as things succeed, likely one every 50 feet. Or I shouldn't say likely, potentially. This is one of the Oregon white oaks that didn't make it. I believe this is the first one I've seen that didn't make it. Oh, they've surprised me before. They're one of the few trees that are explicitly, I've read, you're explicitly advised not to water them in the summer. They must have some soil biology that is very well adapted. There's a little Tanzawa, and there's several other that are just escaping me right now. Silverleaf. And then down the hill there's a couple more white oaks. There's black locust there. There's some linden, and a couple sugar maples, which you can see, which eventually, hopefully, will create a little bit of a fall color and a bit of a barrier with a neighbor, just for visual and auditory kind of seclusion. I guess this is a good spot to turn over to another section, as I'm going to have to walk uphill into the sun. This is, again, Zumeta, Old Growth Orchard and Nursery, which is just 3 years in, starting to unfurl for the spring. enjoying a beautiful late May day, and hope you are too. So I'll catch you on the next video, and have a good one.